Tim Powers is out there saying it looks like you're trying to replace your leader by beating the drums for an election.
Well, Brian, since I have so much respect for you as a journalist, why don't you tell me what you heard me say that would make you say that, and not something that a conservative spinmeister would say?
He's saying it in public.
You're talking to me about a conservative spinmeister. You tell me something that you've heard me say that would lead you to say that. You're the journalist asking me the question. Tim Powers isn't a journalist. He's a conservative spinner.
Fine. If you went to an election now, polls say that you would lose seats. Would that be an opportunity for you? Are you angling for leadership? He raises an interesting question, and that's what I'm putting to you.
You're a journalist? I'm a member of Parliament. You have the obligation, if you're going to make a statement like that, to point to something that I've said that you can ask your question based on. I'm not going to answer a pure hypothetical from you, Brian. I have too much respect for you, and you should have a little bit more respect for your own function and ours than to ask questions like that. So tell me something that I've said that allows you to ask that question, Brian Lilly.
Well, I can ask whatever question I feel like, Tom.
Well, tell me something that I've said that leads to that question. Something that I've done or said. You're asking a purely hypothetical question based on something that comes from a conservative spinmeister.
We ask them all the time.
Tell me something I've said.
You've said that an election is likely. You've called for an election.
Show me where I've said that.
Well, I don't have the
which questions we ask.
So off you go.
I've never said I've never called for an election. You just made that up.
Go on to somebody else.
You've made stuff about me before, and you better start watching yourself. You've done that with me before once on something very specific that I talked to you about one-on-one, and I kept it between us. But if you're going to keep making up stuff, you're going to be held to account yourself. You've got moral obligations here too, and you've got ethical obligations as a journalist.
I don't think I'm going to give up my day job.
Unfortunately, I'm going to be voting for Mr. Mulcair in this election.
Now that you're the official opposition, people will want your opinion, and it matters more, frankly, on a wide range of issues. For example, someone might say, Thomas Mulcair, should the U.S. release pictures of Osama bin Laden, as many are demanding? What would you say?
I don't think, from what I've heard, that those pictures exist, and if they do, I'll leave that up to the American military. I do know that from
You don't think those pictures exist?
No, I don't think that if they've got pictures of a cadaver, then there's probably more going on than we suspect in what happened there. On the other hand, if they do have them and they don't release them, I think that they're probably doing it in the most decent way. I think that if there is something that went on there, it requires a full analysis. And we have to understand whether or not there was an action, whether it was an action in self-defense or whether it was something that was more in the style of a direct killing, and that has to do with American law and international law as well.
And because there's now news that the question was Osama bin Laden reaching for his weapon or was he just shot? You're talking about that, but just so I understand this clearly.
Well, they would require more than a picture in that case, Evan. You'd need a movie of the whole thing, and I don't think you're going to get that either.
But just so I understand that, when you say you don't think the pictures exist, people want to see, just explain exactly why you think there might not be pictures of the cadaver and the body of Osama bin Laden.
Well, I guess you'd have to, it's very difficult to explain a negative proposition. You're affirming that they do exist. If the Americans say that such things do exist, then it'll be up to them to release them.
I only infer because they say they won't release a photo, that implies that they have a photo.
Possibly. I don't honestly believe that it's germane. I think that if the Americans have taken pictures in that circumstance, they won't be able to prove very much as to whether or not Mr. Obama was indeed at one point holding a weapon. I don't think that we're going to get very far with this debate on that score.
Thomas Mulcair, NDP MP, we look forward to having you back here in Ottawa, and you're dragging a whole lot of new friends with you, Mr. Mulcair. We look forward to it.
Thank you, Evan.
Political of you. You'll do well, my friend. How about this? In winter, do you wear a beret or a toque?
I have a beret, but it's got a red star on it. It's a Che Guevara beret.
Oh, they're going to use that quote so much on Sun News.
I want to make sure I understand your position, because some might say the logical extension of your position is
that the status quo is fine and that the program is in fact sustainable. Do you think it's sustainable in its current form?
Don't take my word for it. Listen to the parliamentary budget officer who's run the numbers and said that it's sustainable. Listen to the OECD that's looked at Canada's situation and said it's sustainable. It's never been in danger. There's not a problem. This is an answer to no known problem. But that's purely ideologically driven by the Conservatives. We're going to start chopping. Tens of billions of dollars are going to be removed from the pockets of hardworking Canadians. That's the choice that Stephen Harper's made. Of course, it'll be reversed by an NDP government in 2015.
Mr. Speaker, last year there were 563 takeovers by foreign companies of Canadian companies. The NDP opposed one.
Takeovers in Canada last year, the NDP has opposed one. Your sellout of Canada's raw natural resources to Nixon.
I ought to once again remind the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to not address his comments directly at colleagues, but through the chair. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the ideological opposition of the NDP to foreign investment is well known and often expressed here by the critic of that party. But what makes this intervention particularly bizarre is when we know that the NDP, and they've said so in election campaigns, is actually against the development of the oil sands entirely. So, Mr. Speaker, for them to get up and masquerade somehow that they understand this industry and are defending the interests of Canadians, people know the only government that will defend the interests of this industry and Canadians is this government.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in failing to...
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, in failing to apply basic principles of sustainable development like polluter pay in all of our development in Canada, the Conservatives are leaving the largest ecological, economic and social debt in history in the backpacks of the next generation. We will stand up. We will have that debate with them because Canadians agree with us. They're destabilizing the Canadian economy. We've lost the manufacturing sector. We will stand up for the future. They're part of
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
But at this time of Merry Christmas, I would wish serenity now to all members of the House. Mr. Speaker, this government, as it has done on foreign investment, making sure that we're able to attract foreign investment, but in a way that protects the interests of Canadians and ensures this country is not run by foreign governments. We are and will continue to do the same thing on the environment and the economy. We are the first government to make progress on actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time we are making sure that we develop our resources and provide good, high-paying jobs to work in.
Order. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. We've lost an awful lot of time to these types of disturbances.
like a good dinner.
Order. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister simply doesn't understand the difference between the takeover of a Canadian company by a foreign company and the takeover of a Canadian resource by a foreign power.
Exactly.
It's not that CNOOC purchased Nexen, it's that the government of China now owns our national resources. Under the FIFA, they can buy whatever they want in the oil patch. They've sold us out, Mr. Speaker. That's the tragedy of this deal. They have not respected Canada's right to control its own resources.
Hear, hear.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government has been very clear that we will not permit in the oil sands or in other areas of the Canadian economy foreign governments to own a substantial portion of our resources. We are crystal clear on that, Mr. Speaker, and the FIPA with China is absolutely clear as well. Every such transaction in the future will be subject to the government's discretion in the Investment Canada Act, and we will exercise that discretion to protect Canadians.
This game of playing one part of the country against another, which effectively is what Mr. Mulcair's statements do, is of no value to anyone. Mr. Mulcair is no longer just representing Quebec, and the Western provinces are not some outlier region. He represents all of Canada. These remarks have been his biggest mistake since becoming national leader. He needs to revisit and revise them. Mr. Mulcair evidently has a very low opinion of premiers and a very high opinion of himself. Well, pride often comes before a fall. But worse by far is his deliberate, antagonizing, and quarrelsome bent towards a whole section of the country. He seems to think he's not a leader of the opposition as much as a leader of the opposition to the Alberta economy. Well, it's one thing to play the game with a touch of modesty or reserve, but on current conduct, it might be fair to ask if Mr. Mulcair is playing the game at all. Where is he? What is he saying? The biggest news out of the NDP these last few days is one of its members starting a racket about World War I. This is the socialist equivalent of one of those famous Clinton bimbo eruptions.
Yes, I'm sure that's a quote. Here are some facts. 300,000 more Canadians are still unemployed today than before the recession hit. Today, we have a $66.9 billion trade deficit. There was a surplus before they arrived. That's the real Conservative record. Their last budget failed to implement a meaningful job creation strategy, and they continue to gut the manufacturing sector. Now we hear that the government is planning to cut funding to the provinces for skills training. When are they going to take real actions to get Canadians back to work?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to. And the proof is in the fact that in Canada, we have the best job numbers in all of the G7. And I'm frankly more than pleased to contrast our approach with that of the NDP. While in last week, in the break week, we had ministers who were going around the world fighting for Canadian jobs, fighting for Canadian exports. Where was the leader of the NDP? Selling out Canada, selling out Canadian jobs, telling the Americans to not work with Canada for a better, more prosperous future. He should be ashamed of himself for selling out Canada. Brad Walhead.
So lots to talk about. I'd like to start on oil. We've just come out of the West. You've had a number of statements about the oil situation. So I've got some specific questions, but first I want to do a kind of just a quick survey, kind of a yes or no, or agree or disagree, the kind of thing.
Always tough for the politician, but I'll try to do this.
Exactly. The kind of thing you'd fill out on a customs form if you're coming back into the country. So let me try it anyway. If you were Prime Minister today, would there be anything different about the current operation of the oil sands in Alberta? Not future operations, but current. Would anything change?
Yes.
Let's move from oil to the Senate. Another sticky subject. It's no secret that your party has been against the Senate for decades, for ages.
There is no secret about that.
Right. What's the point of bringing it up now? I mean, you've kind of placed it near the front of the cabinet of discussion points for the NDP. I mean, this is a no-win, is it not? I mean,
it's a complex issue.
You're not going to abolish the Senate.
Well, no. The simple fact of the matter is you don't wake up the day after an election and snap your fingers and say, poof, you're gone. No, it doesn't work that way. But you'd have to work with the provinces and territories, something Mr. Harper doesn't like to do. He's talked forever about how bad the Senate is, and yet he's stuffed it with more bagmen and party hacks than anyone ever in the history of Canada.
But wouldn't you have to do the same thing?
Well,
I mean, if you were really serious...
No, my priority would be to sit down and start working with the provinces and territories to abolish it.
Fine, but at some point you'd still have to have a Senate vote in favor of that.
Of course.
If you go through the constitutional process.
But
these men and women aren't going to say, Let's abolish ourselves.
Actually, that's exactly what's happened in most provinces where it's been gotten rid of.
No, but in the Senate itself, would you not have to, if you were Prime Minister, end up putting your own cronies and party hacks and bagmen and bagwomen or whatever into the Senate to get an eventual vote like that? And I ask that because it's like, what's the point of having this discussion? Is anybody really focused on that?
Well,
I mean, is this the kind of issue you want to go to the people on?
It'll be part of our campaign. It always has been. People have to understand that the NDP is of a view that only elected officials should make laws. That's a strong position on our part. Having legislation like Jack Layton's bill on climate change, duly enacted by the House of Commons, overturned by an unelected Senate, as far as we're concerned, that can't take place anymore.
So Peter Van Loan, the government House leader, walked across the floor. He appears to be shaking his finger, and he's obviously visibly upset. Now, there are some words exchanged, and at some point, opposition leader Thomas Mulcair gets involved. There are allegations on both sides of foul language being used, perhaps inappropriate gestures. It really depends who you ask as to what went down, but Paul Dewar of the NDP walks over at one point to intervene, and then eventually we see the Defence Minister, Peter MacKay. He walks over to try and break things up. So you see him there leading the government House leader back across the floor. This is really an example of just how acrimonious the relationship between the government and the opposition has become of late. And it really shows you that with just over a week left in the House of Commons, all of those MPs are probably looking forward to that Christmas break. It can't come soon enough.
Let's move to another issue, 50 plus 1. Some of your favorite numbers. We're talking obviously about Quebec and what kind of a vote would be necessary to engage in negotiations with the rest of the country over possible departure from the Federation. What is the point on that one? I mean, I understand that you've got a base in Quebec. You're extremely popular in Quebec. This doesn't seem to have hurt you in Quebec. But it's raised all sorts of questions in other parts of the country where you want to branch out. What's the point?
We have the advantage of saying the same thing in Calgary that we say in Quebec City. We've been clear. This has been our policy for 8 years. It's called the Sherbrooke Declaration, and it's part of who we are. We also looked at the so-called Clarity Act and said the same thing that most constitutional scholars say: it's anything but clear. We actually give examples of what a clear question would be, very much on the model that Westminster has just agreed to with Scotland. By the way, 50% plus 1 is what the mother of all parliaments has just agreed to as well. And yes, Peter, in a democracy, the side that wins, wins. That's what Westminster has just said, and that's what we're saying.
Well,
but
give me the strongest argument. Let's assume the question is clear and that everybody agrees on that. What is the strongest argument that 50 plus 1 is enough to enter into those negotiations, especially when everyone else seems to argue outside of Quebec, or most everybody outside of Quebec, including some of your own party leaders provincially, that you need more than that?
Once all the subjective elements are clear, the question, the vote count, everything is done clearly and everyone respects the rules, then in a democracy, 50% plus 1 wins what? And then the Supreme Court says that again. That is the mandate that you would take to the negotiation. And if it's a tight-run thing, that will affect the quality of your mandate and what you can negotiate. But I have confidence in one thing, because I was there in the front trenches in 1980. I was there fighting tooth and nail in 95 for Canada in Quebec. So I have no lessons to receive on from anyone on that. I believe firmly that we've got one of the best countries in the world. I'll continue that fight. But I also understand that
what's
the liberal
the importance of bringing this up now? As you said, your party. I know, but your party is clear on this position, has been for 8 years. But you brought it out once again.
No, with respect, no. What happened was the Bloc Québécois had a motion on the table at the beginning of the session. So you have to be consequential with what you've been saying. And we state what a clear majority
I get that, but you've raised the 50.1 argument.
It's been there all along, for 8 years. Yeah.
Yeah, but you've raised it once again. It's out there, and it's, there's no doubt that it'll be used against you by other parties. So you're obviously prepared to have that fight.
I'm not shy about that.
But is there something else that's going on that, nobody knows Quebec provincial politics better than you in terms of the national leaders. Are you concerned that we're heading quickly towards another situation where there could be another referendum vote?
I know Pauline Marois, and I know her government very well. I know most of the major players in her government very well and personally, and I know that they've never given up on that.
But would
they
it
have a very
surprise
slim
you
minority.
if they call for a referendum vote in the near future?
In the near future, impossible. They have a very slim minority government, and so I don't think that it's on the table. But I'm also convinced of this, having been through those 2 referenda. If there is that clear question, do you want to leave Canada, yes or no? I know what the result's going to be. And that's why there's no point playing the game that the Liberals play, which is to say, well, we won't tell you what the number is. It's whatever you get plus 1. That's never going to work. That's provoking people. That's always been the art of the Liberals, to provoke that fight with Quebec, turn around to the rest of Canada and say, good thing we're here, because look at how they're behaving. We take a different approach. Jack Layton's approach and my approach has always been open, honest dialogue. Unlike Stephen Harper, who mused darkly about building firewalls, I've spent my career trying to build bridges. I know Quebec, as you just said, and I also know Quebecers. And if we do that, we'll keep this extraordinary, great country of ours together.
You've raised the Liberals a couple of times. They're going through, as every party goes through when they go through a leadership race, the opportunity to raise their profile. And it seems to have had some impact on polls. Most of them still show them in 3rd place, but moving up a bit at the expense of both other parties. Are you worried about the Liberals?
No, and I'll tell you why. The Liberals have spent decades flashing left and turning right once they were in power. Classic example, Kyoto. They signed Kyoto for partisan political purposes, but under the Liberals, Canada had one of the worst records in the world of increases in greenhouse gases. They talked about daycare, 13 years in power with a majority, did nothing until the very end. It's not in place. And then they complained that they got thrown out of office by the voting public, but they had never done it. People are tired of that. With the NDP, people will vote for the change they want and actually get it.
But they seem to be talking about a degree of change, the Liberals, whether it is simply in the look, in the appearance of the person who seems to be the front runner in their race, the ground that he's staking out, which is different than yours on some of the key issues we've been discussing here in this program.
If we take an issue like the first one we talked about, which was the oil sands, you can't say that you're going to half-enforce environmental legislation. You can't wink to Canadian electors saying, we're going to be on a track for sustainable development, but don't worry, once we're there, we'll never do it, which is what the Liberals have always been about. So there's a big difference between a one-liner and a slogan and trying to come across to the public as saying, you know, bring us back and everything will be fine. People remember what the Liberals have been about. People see what's going on.
Do you think Justin Trudeau is a one-liner, sloganeering politician? You were a huge fan of his father, right?
I did. I admired his father.
Is he his father?
I have no comment to make on any of the candidates in the Liberal leadership race, and I'll tell you why. Whoever becomes their leader will be their 7th leader in 9 years. I'm going to let them sort themselves out, but I'll go further. When I was running for the NDP leadership, Mr. Harper, for reasons known only to him, decided it was opportune for him to start getting involved in my leadership race. To be honest with you, I took it as a bit of a compliment that he didn't want to see me as his adversary, and maybe that's proven that he was right not to want that. But I will not stick my nose in the leadership race of another party. It's important in the lifeblood of our institution in Parliament. I'm going to let them sort themselves out. That doesn't mean we're not taking notes.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker,
obviously, you disagree with Stephen Harper on a lot of issues, and you show that all the time. But do you respect his ability to debate you in the House of Commons?
Oh yeah, and actually, I mean, I always disappoint part of our base when they expect me to demonize him. When I'm dealing with Stephen Harper, I see someone's husband, someone's dad, someone's son, someone's brother. I'm dealing with another human being. It's a big mistake, I think, on several levels in politics to personalize too much. If you're doing that and they change the person, then you've sort of lost your focus. But it can't be about the person. It's about what the ideas are. Otherwise, you can't talk to the public. If you just keep saying, well, this person's bad, that doesn't work. And to be quite honest, even though we'll slug each other in the House, if we bump into each other in the corridor after, we just shake hands and it's all smiles. It's a professional life that we're both involved in, and we both get that. He's also very structured. He's very determined. And I think that makes it a little bit easier for us to contrast, because in the next election, Canadians will have a clear choice. We'll have a choice between Mr. Harper's government that wants to add 2 years before you can get your old age security, wants to take $36 billion out of the projected transfers for health care. We think that that's wrong, and they'll have an NDP proposing to form a government. With all the experience people have seen, we've been in power in 5 provinces and 1 territory. They know that, with the notable exception of the one NDP government in Ontario, which had serious problems, that generally we've been very good at balancing.
You can't resist taking the shot at Bob Rae.
I didn't mention his name. But he is in the front benches of the Liberal Party now, which is probably just as well.
It's interesting that you've got your lines down already 2 years out of it.
Well, this is a pivotal session. I mean, on May 2nd, Mr. Harper starts the 3rd year of this majority mandate. So we're in that pivotal moment now. We're transferring from being the official opposition to getting set up as the government in waiting. And that's a big transfer right now. We're having a big policy convention in Montreal in April. That'll be the kickoff, literally, for the next campaign. Stompin' Tom Connor is a giant of Canadian music and a great promoter of Canadian music. Left us last night, and our team would like to sing a little homage for him. Take it away, gang.
On what date and at what time was the Prime Minister informed that Nigel Wright had made a payment to Conservative Senator Mike Duffy?
Bravo. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have been very clear on this question. This matter came to my attention 2 weeks ago after speculation appeared in the media. On Wednesday, May the 15th, I was told about it. At that very moment, I demanded that my office ensure that the public is informed, and they were informed appropriately.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
When did the Prime Minister first speak with Nigel Wright about Mike Duffy's expenses?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I have said repeatedly, my first knowledge of this was on the date and at the time indicated. Prior to that point in time, it was my understanding that Mr. Duffy had paid back his own expenses.
The question was, when did the Prime Minister first speak with Nigel Wright about Mike Duffy's expenses? And how many times did he speak with Nigel Wright in the week preceding his resignation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the NDP is suggesting that I had any information to the contrary from Mr. Wright prior to this, that is completely false. I learned of this on May the 15th, immediately made that information public, as I have said many times.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We're asking very simple, straightforward questions, and the Prime Minister's not answering them. That's the problem. Canadians want answers. Quelle directive est-ce que le Premier ministre a donné à Nigel Wright ou à d'autres membres de son cabinet pour régler les problèmes de dépenses du sénateur conservateur Mike Duffy?
Spending by Senator Mike Duffy. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Didn't give directives on the contrary, Mr. Speaker.
Mon opinion était que M. Duffy devrait payer ses propres dépenses et ça a été ma connaissance jusqu'à le 15 mai.
And that was what I believe until May 15th.
Then what changed? Between the time that the Prime Minister expressed his total, absolute support of Nigel Wright and the moment that he accepted his resignation just 3 days later. What changed?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Wright accepted full responsibility for his error in this matter. He offered his resignation, and I accepted that resignation. As we know, he will be subject to an examination by the Ethics Commissioner, and that is the accountability mechanism that we've put in place for these kinds of situations.
The Honourable Member for Pakenham. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister keeps referring us back to the whitewashed report of the Senate. Senator Carolyn Stewart Olson is his former press secretary. Did he or did he not ever have any conversations with his former press secretary, Carolyn Stewart Olson, concerning this affair in the Senate?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, no, I did not. But it is very clear the Senate Committee itself has answered those questions. It is the author of its own report. That report mirrors the recommendations of an independent audit conducted on behalf of the Senate. And the government, as a matter of fact, agrees with the recommendations in those reports, which are that the expenses in question are inappropriate and amounts such as that must be repaid to the taxpayers.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Did the Prime Minister ever discuss this matter in Cabinet?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate Committee has been very clear. It made its own report on these matters. The government's position is also extremely well known. Inappropriate expenditures, when people claim expenditures that they never actually incurred, these are inappropriate and must be repaid to the taxpayers.
Prime Minister keeps trying to convince Canadians that he's being straightforward. That was a very straightforward and simple question. Did he ever discuss this matter in Cabinet?
The Right Honourable Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, the Senate Committee report is a Senate Committee report. It is not a matter of government or cabinet business. That is plainly obvious.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Quand est-ce que le Premier ministre a été mis au courant qu'une entente, on vise maintenant l'entente, pas le paiement. Quand est-ce qu'il a été mis au courant qu'une entente avait été conclue avec le sénateur conservateur Mike Duffy? La date.
What is the date? Mr. Speaker, the Wednesday, May 15th, was the day that Mr. Wright informed me that he gave a personal check to Mr. Duffy so that he could pay taxpayers back. Up until that point, I was under the understanding that Mr. Duffy had repaid his own expenses.
Who in the Prime Minister's office spoke with Mr. Duffy about withholding information from auditors or others investigating this matter?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I have no information to that effect. Obviously, as I've said repeatedly, the arrangements between Mr. Duffy and Mr. Wright are a matter of inquiry of both commissioners of ethics commissioners of both houses of this Parliament, and obviously we will provide any support necessary in those examinations.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mike Duffy wrote in an email that after being paid $90,000, he, quote, stayed silent on the orders of the Prime Minister's office. Who told Mike Duffy to remain silent?
Excellent. Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, these are not matters that I am privy to. This is an email. This is an email from Mike Duffy, who is no longer a member of our caucus and certainly never conveyed that information to me.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Once Mike Duffy received the $90,000 from the Prime Minister's office, he stopped cooperating with Deloitte, who were the auditors in the file. Was that part of the deal with Mike Duffy?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note the falsehood in that particular question. Mr. Duffy has received no money from the Prime Minister's office or from the taxpayers of Canada. Mr. Wright has been very clear that Mr. Wright gave this money to Mr. Duffy out of his own personal resources, and to my knowledge, there is no legal agreement between the two of them.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, when the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, in the course of his functions, from the Prime Minister's office, gives $90,000 to shut up a sitting senator, that's out of the Prime Minister's office. No legal document? A check is a document. Do they have a copy of the check? Has the Prime Minister or anyone in his office seen that check?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the Leader of the NDP just said, there is no check from the Prime Minister's office. There is no use of Prime Minister's office funds in this affair. This was an action Mr. Wright took using his own resources, on which he is now subject to examination and accountability by the Ethics Commission.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
If he's never seen the check, how can the Prime Minister rise in this House and tell us that it's a personal check? How does he know that it's not from a trust account? How does he know that if he's never seen the check?
Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is a matter of public record, as Mr. Wright himself has said. I can certainly assure the member there is no such money that has gone out of our office or out of PMO budget.
Well, after all the dumping we've done on Question Period over the years, it's hard to say bad things about today's edition. It was, in short, a bit of a jaw-dropper. Bruce is in Ottawa tonight, Chantel's in Montreal, Andrew is here in Toronto. We'll get to Question Period in a second. I want to start off with what happened this evening, just in the last couple of hours. The Senate committee referring to the RCMP the matters of the Duffy expenses and the Duffy-Wright deal. This is the same group of people who not that long ago whitewashed their report and basically said nothing overly bad happened. What should we make of this, going now, calling in the RCMP? Andrew.
Well, I guess the first question is, does the RCMP really need an invitation to investigate? But be that as it may, it certainly seems to be appropriate on the face of it. I just hope people won't let it drop there. I hope people won't assume that the only issue involved here was there personal criminal wrongdoing by one or two people, or are there larger systemic questions. I hope people won't allow the government to get by with the old excuse of, well, we can't offer any comment or answers because it's being investigated by the RCMP. In other words, I hope that this is not used as a way of cauterizing this issue rather than opening up for further investigation.
You may hope that, but really, do you believe it won't be?
Well, obviously it depends upon what a lot of the rest of us in the media and the opposition do. If all of us roll over and say, yeah, it's with the RCMP, so nobody has to answer any questions, then they'll be better able to get away with that. But it should be in everyone's interest, including, I may say, the government's, to come clean and be open as they possibly can about this, and we're not seeing a lot of that kind of transparency to date.
Chantel?
Well, I was watching that committee thinking that these people would never have met to review and revise their stance on Senator Duffy if this had not broken out in the open, so they were quite willing to give him a pass. It's fine to refer him to the RCMP. Maybe some senators need to find out that they don't have to give the mandate to the RCMP. The RCMP will decide how far it pushes its investigation. But I guess a lot of people out there are curious to know if this is a one-off, the Duffy case, or whether the honor system of the Senate was abused. And it would be interesting to see senators be curious about the general picture of how the Senate has been behaving.
Bruce, what did you make of it?
Well, it was extraordinary, and it would have been the most extraordinary thing that happened today had it not been for what happened in Question Period, Peter. I think it's the latest in a series of really disorderly retreats by the government on this file, and it really reveals to us that the government still doesn't have control over this. We're still in a situation really where the three people who probably know exactly what happened in the conversations that matter still aren't talking about those conversations, and I think the concern on the part of the opposition party parties and the media has to be at this point not to allow this idea of an RCMP investigation to throw a blanket over all of the other probes and all of the other questions that deserve to be asked and deserve to be answered in the coming days.
All right, you mentioned question period, so let's remind people who only perhaps saw a glimpse of it at the top of this hour, give them a better sense of the flavor of things. The main event, the main bout, if you will, was clearly between the Leader of the Opposition, Tom Mulcair of the NDP, and the Prime Minister. Here's kind of a minute of clips from those exchanges. Watch this.
Did the Prime Minister ever discuss this matter in Cabinet? Who told Mike Duffy to remain silent? Once Mike Duffy received the $90,000 from the Prime Minister's office, he stopped cooperating with Deloitte, who were the auditors in the file. Was that part of the deal with Mike Duffy?
Mr. Duffy has received no money from the Prime Minister's office or from the taxpayers of Canada.
When the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, in the course of his functions, from the Prime Minister's office, gives $90,000 to shut up a sitting senator, that's out of the Prime Minister's office. Do they have a copy of the check? Has the Prime Minister or anyone in his office seen that check?
There is no check from the Prime Minister's office. There is no use of Prime Minister's office funds in this affair.
If he's never seen the check, how can the Prime Minister rise in this House and tell us that it's a personal check? How does he know that it's not from a trust account? How does he know that if he's never seen the check?
There is no such money that has gone out of our office or out of PMO budget.
Well, if you didn't know before watching that, you know now that Tom Mulcair was a lawyer. Because he kind of used his legal background to go after things. That and the suggestion from one Andrew Coyne right here on this program not long ago to shorten questions, get to the point, make the questions short. You are getting some credit for this, Andrew.
Well, it's ridiculous. It's got nothing to do with me. I can assure you.
No, but I mean, you know, you made this point and a number of people picked up on it. Yeah. But nevertheless, watching what happened there today, is that the kind of question period that is something that those parliamentarians should be striving for on a daily basis? Can they keep that kind of exchange going?
That certainly should be. I mean, on the one hand, it was extraordinary. We have not seen this kind of session and question period for many years. It was, on the other hand, exactly what they should be doing most of the time. And I hope some MPs are learning that you get better results if you don't showboat and you don't preface your question with 3-minute preambles and you actually just ask short, simple, factual questions. It has to be sustained for everybody's sake. Again, people always want to say, well, was there a knockout blow and who hit who? You're engaged here, as you should be, in fact-finding and trying to find out the truth of the matter. The truth may be entirely benign. It may be, in fact, that the Prime Minister's story is entirely truthful and there's no story here. Or it may not be. And so you don't have to come up with the big Perry Mason moment of, aha. What you're doing is chipping away, laying down markers, putting the government on the record about certain facts, and if the story holds up, then the story will hold up, and if it doesn't, it won't.
All right, well, so what did we take away from this? I think everybody agrees it was quite something to watch, so it had that kind of attraction to it. But in terms of substance, did we learn anything today that we weren't aware of before question period? Chantal?
No, we did not, except that we now know who the Leader of the Opposition is in the House of Commons. And Thomas Mulcair has established himself clearly as the dominant opposition figure in that House. So I think from that angle it was interesting. But on a fact-based basis, I don't think that question period really allows you to do what Andrew describes, which is something that would happen in a court of law, a Perry Mason style interrogation. And I also think that when we are saying what we are saying about it, we are acting as journalists who think that we watched someone give someone a good run at a press conference. But in the reality of daily question period, I agree that tighter questions serve Mulcair today and usually particularly well. But it's also the role of the opposition to highlight in those questions the differences between where it stands and where the government is going. It can't just be prosecutorial. That being said, I can't think of very many leaders of the oppositions that I've covered that could have delivered the performance I watched today.
Bruce?
I think we learned two things. I think the first thing that we learned was that this issue has not been like any other that we've seen before, in the sense that probably all of the Conservative cabinet and backbenchers were hoping, indeed maybe expecting, that the Prime Minister was going to be able to come into the House today to face the fire and really spray foam and put the fire out, because he's been able to do that so many times in the course of his career as Prime Minister. And against that, we have become accustomed to seeing opposition attacks fizzle and fade under that kind of discipline that the Prime Minister has typically had. We didn't see that today. We saw the reverse of it. It's another sign of the loss of invincibility of the government. The second thing that we learned is really in the area of answers that the Prime Minister was not comfortable giving. So I looked at what Mr. Mulcair did as something of a reconnaissance by fire. He was throwing questions at areas basically so that he could observe when and in what circumstances the Prime Minister was willing to give a very specific and detailed answer, but then there were a number of areas where clearly that wasn't forthcoming, and that suggests that there are more difficult answers that the government probably doesn't want to get into, and opportunity for more questioning ahead.
You're nodding there, Andrew.
Well, I think that's a very important point, is what oftentimes what you learn from these things is from what's not said, the dog that didn't bark. He did not have an answer, for example, of, did the cabinet discuss this? Or the general question of, were there broader discussions about how to deal with this Duffy situation? Because, of course, what we're trying to get at here is not just what did the Prime Minister know and when did he know it. That's sort of, again, the Perry Mason question. What we're trying to get at here is, was there a culture, was there a set of expectations, was there an ethical climate established by the person at the top that said that shortcuts could be taken and expediencies could be pursued that would not meet the smell test? And that certainly is very much worth getting at. Again, quite apart from RCMP investigations or any of that business.
Question about the lawyer was one of those that I saw too.
But I don't think question period is actually needed to show that. Up to a point, the fact that all these things have been happening is a sign that their culture is set in there. And at the end of the day, regardless of whether you find, a proof or an answer that goes to that, the Prime Minister is responsible for the tone that is set. He is responsible for having a Chief of Staff that thought that it was okay to sign off a check to get rid of an issue rather than probe and try to clean up the Senate.
There was something, Bruce, you said a couple of minutes ago that reminded me of something that struck me while I was watching Question Period today. And it was whenever the Prime Minister was talking, watching the faces of the people around him on his side. In other words, the Conservative, not only the backbench, but the front bench as well. They were focused very much on every word he said and the way he said it. It was almost as if it was for them too the first time they were hearing the answers to this question. And when you run that against the backdrop of some of the things we've talked about in the last few weeks about, the potential of a, kind of open mutiny going on inside the Conservative caucus, I found that interesting. What aside from the headlines, what struck you most about watching this question period? Andrew?
To pick up on something you were just saying, the Prime Minister was obviously taking this very seriously, and to his credit, I think he actually, as a pure performance, did quite well. But they realized that this is serious business. There was not some of the same bravura and ho ho ho, laugh it off type of thing. I think that and the serious, methodical nature of the opposition were the two most striking things today.
Chantal?
I think that the looks that you noticed on the MPs' faces and the kind of panicky talk that we heard around that Senate table tonight, I don't think that it's the opposition or the media driving it. I think it's Canadians and the public. I think that these MPs, these senators are taking a beating in the social media, at home, in their writings, and that's why they have the glum face. If they'd gone home and no one had mentioned it, or it didn't really matter, they wouldn't have looked as serious. It wasn't just Thomas Mulcair asking tough questions of the Prime Minister.
Bruce?
Well, I think the government has had such a tin ear on this issue for so many days in a row, and the more that they tried to play the issue the way they have played so many other issues in the past with real pugilism and counterattacks, the more they found that their own base as well as general constituents were really getting angry with them. And you didn't actually see a message from the Conservatives that started to get out in front of public opinion at all until probably about Saturday in an interview that Michelle Rempel, a Conservative MP from Calgary gave to Evan Solomon on the House. That was the first time that I saw the Conservative message look as though it was a little bit more in tune with public opinion, and I think on many questions the Prime Minister was a little bit more like that today than he has been in the past.
But they're having a particularly bad run. I mean, it's not just this issue. I mean, there was the patronage appointments issue, there's the Arthur Porter thing that is bubbling for the last 24 hours, and of course the robocalls ruling last week. They've got a lot on their plate, Andrew, here to turn a corner of any kind.
Absolutely, and I think what the dilemma they're running into is that this is existential. You can't spin your way out of something if spinning is how you got into this. You know, oftentimes you can read how a government gets into this kind of trouble by the way in which they try to get out of it. And if expediency and taking shortcuts and looking the other way and all those kinds of ethical shortcomings are how they got into this, then you need a better answer than just more of that kind of tactic and that kind of thing. You need to really take a look at yourself and what you're doing, and I'm not sure whether the leopard can change its spots to that extent, but I keep coming back to this. There's no alternative but transparency if they really want to dig themselves out of this. I don't think they fully understand that.
I got 15 seconds, Chantal, for you to close it out.
Well, you've got me at a loss for words with your 15 seconds. But,
sorry.
So I'm going to take a pass.
Okay, well, you almost took it up anyway in taking the pass. All right, listen, thank you all. It was, you know, it was a good night to be doing this. We're usually Thursday, but this was a good Tuesday to do it. Chantal's in Montreal, Andrew is in Toronto, and Bruce is in Ottawa. Thank you very much. Quick reminder, no ad issue this Thursday, at least at this point. That's the plan.
Écoutez, tactique numéro 1, va te cacher pendant une semaine en Amérique du Sud. Tactique numéro 2, attaque l'opposition. Tactique numéro 3, tire l'alarme à feu. Tactique numéro 4, va te cacher en Europe pour une autre semaine. Merci. Well, since you insist, we've been going through the Conservative playbook. Attempt number 1, go hide out in South America for a week. Attempt number 2, attack the opposition. Attempt number 3, pull the fire alarm. Attempt number 4, go back to Europe for another week.